Meanwhile, we must turn our attention to personal finances, and joining me this morning is Dr. Roger Ewald, who is CEO of Fair Money, personal finance and credit expert. The good doctor, good morning to you.
Good morning, James. How are you?
Really well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So perhaps you can pick our way through the Prime Minister's £12 billion a year taxation increase. I mean, look, the headlines, the front pages are saying this is more tax than we've had to pay since the Second World War.
Well, I think there were two big announcements yesterday, James. One was the £12 billion tax increase per year, and the other was the freeze on the triple lock pensions, which means the increase in our monthly state pensions. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's always a man to be listened to, and a lot of other Tory MPs are really quite concerned about campaign promises being broken, and that's true. But, this planet was hit by a meteor. Nobody expected the pandemic. I think everything you and David has just said is quite correct. It's not a perhaps all bets are off sort of situation, but really one needs to be realistic. Who is going to pay for everything that the government has paid for through this terrible once in a lifetime period we've been through? I think that a 1.25% increase in national insurance, and at the same time a similar increase on share sales, is not asking too much.
I mean, there are a couple of things that I wouldn't mind just asking in terms of just where else they could have gone, because I do think that national insurance, so that hits everybody who's working. Then if they do freeze the triple lock temporarily, then that means that pensioners will contribute. The only piece that seems to be missing to me are the companies who are not necessarily paying enough tax. And in particular, I would say those companies who are either global because they're using Luxembourg SARLs to reduce their tax burden, or Guernsey or Jersey-based trusts, and also internet-based companies who perhaps don't necessarily pay enough through the business rate system because of the way that that's formulated. I'm slightly surprised that he didn't have a little go to say everybody's got to pay for this and this is how we're going to do it.
Well, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think really they're very much like your and David's chips and car example a moment ago. This is an ongoing situation that has nothing to do whether there is a tax increase or a pandemic. Those companies should be paying more tax. And I think that's probably an ongoing effort to get them to do that. It's a very complex area, as you know, and wouldn't have produced the results in cash, hard cash that's needed if that's all he used. So I think
that, I guess, is the other point, isn't it? Which is this is not an opportunity to window dress. If the money doesn't come in, then he's got a problem. And sometimes you've got to window dress to make it look as if you're doing something on the tax front, and sometimes you've really got to rake the cash in. Talking of that, let me just ask you about the triple lock on pensions. A lot of people won't necessarily understand what the triple lock means and what Boris Johnson has put on hold.
Well, it is a very complex sounding situation, but it's actually relatively simple. What it really says, James, is that the state pension, the amount of money that you and I get in our pocket every month or every week, shall increase every year by a minimum of 2.5%. If earnings are higher, it should increase by that amount. And if the cost of living is higher, it should increase by that amount. Triple lock is probably a bit of a misnomer. It should be triple standard or something. Basically, what's happened here is that given the wage situation, if you look at earnings, our state pensions should have increased some 8%. But instead, they're only going to increase for 1 year of 2.5%. I think that's pretty reasonable, again, because we need the money from somewhere.
Well, exactly. And I suppose the other point is that if inflation has been driven by the pandemic rather than necessarily a real rise in costs, then perhaps it's not necessarily a good idea to just shove that into pensions. There we go. Dr. Roger Ewald, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning and going through those. Roger is Chief Executive of Fair Money, Personal Finance, and he's a credit expert as well. There you go. Thank you for